Hi, welcome to this video introducing the BizTalk Maturity Assessment. My name's Mike Stevenson and I'm a UK-based freelance consultant specialising in BizTalk, Windows, Azure and integration. I'm actually the creator of the BizTalk Maturity Assessment. I've been an MVP in the BizTalk and integration space for about 5 years now, and I also help to organise the UK Connected Systems user group. To find out a little bit more about me, some of my details are below. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the customer scenarios which led to the creation of the maturity assessment. Then we're going to talk through some of the details of the BizTalk maturity assessment and have a small demo of how it works. The first scenario is about an organisation who's a new customer of BizTalk. This customer has decided to choose BizTalk as a platform to develop their integration solutions on, and the customer is full of good intentions on how to deliver projects. However, they're really unsure about how to start off doing the things in the right way and how to be successful. This is a great use case for the BizTalk Maturity Assessment because the assessment can help provide some guidance to you about the right things to be doing and thinking about, especially if you're a new customer. The second use case for the BizTalk Maturity model is one I've called the isolated project team. In this example, a project team has worked with an organisation and delivered a number of BizTalk projects. The project team, that for various reasons, then leaves. After a period of time, the customer then has BizTalk in their organisation in production, but they don't really understand what they have, and the people who delivered it aren't really around anymore. The customer doesn't really know then what they can do with BizTalk to really take advantage of that initial investment, and they also kind of struggle with various little bits and pieces of problems with what the original project team left. Now, the thing here is really about a knowledge transfer kind of problem, and the BizTalk maturity model can help you here by making sure you've sort of ticked off all the right governance things that you should have done in order to make sure you've got a good understanding of the BizTalk capability that your organisation has. The third use case for the BizTalk maturity assessment is one I've called Project Disaster. In this case, a project's usually started off, but quite quickly things start to go wrong. There's various causes of this, but typically a lot of it boils down to the fact that the project team don't have the right things in place which give their project a good chance of being successful. Often, the pressure of delivery means things get out of control very quickly and things can become very heated. Often in these scenarios, people and vendors tend to get replaced quite quickly as well, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problems. The BizTalk Maturity Assessment can really help here by helping you to make sure you've got some of the key things in place that gives your project a really good chance of starting and can actually fend off this scenario. But if you're actually unfortunate enough to find yourself in this place, this is a really good assessment of where you currently stand in terms of your BizTalk capability and can help you find significant areas of improvement which you can work on. I've been unfortunate enough to have to be called into a number of customers in this situation in the past, and the BizTalk maturity assessment is something that I've used to help those customers get back on track. The next scenario is really about a company who has a heavy dependency on key individuals for delivery of BizTalk projects. So typically this kind of organisation would have done probably a number of projects and been quite successful, but the knowledge is all really in a small number of people's heads, and the company doesn't really have any well-established collaborative ways of working and possibly not very good documentation. The big risk in this scenario is that if people move on, the organisation is suddenly in a really bad place, but also companies in this situation can find it difficult to scale teams up or down as projects kind of come to an end and new projects start. In this scenario, the BizTalk maturity assessment can really help you by making sure you're doing a number of those key things that mean you've got a collaborative way of working, and it gives new people joining the team a good chance of getting up to speed because you've done things like the right level of documentation, the right onboarding process for new staff. This is quite a common problem that I've come across in the industry. The next scenario is really one around outsourcing. So if you imagine we have an organisation who's delivered many successful BizTalk projects, and the organisation decides to outsource its capability, but because the organisation doesn't really have a good handle on how it does BizTalk and what it actually has, the outsource partner doesn't necessarily know or maintain many of the existing ways of working which have been successful in the past. The organisation didn't really understand about those key ways of working that made sure they were successful. And then you get into a scenario when problems come up where the outsourcing partner will potentially blame things to do with the organisation, and the organisation sees that the partner isn't successful and doesn't know why the old team used to work and the new one doesn't. This is a great use case for the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, because what you would be able to do from an organisational perspective is actually measure your current capability, and then once you've done outsourcing, you can again measure the capability at points in time to make sure that you're still as mature as you were previously, and that would give you a really easy way to identify things that weren't working and take appropriate improvement actions. The next scenario is about vendor quality assurance. In this case, an organisation has engaged with a partner to deliver BizTalk projects. The organisation wants to make sure that the partner's doing a good job, but also that when the project ends, the partner would leave the organisation in a healthy position to do future BizTalk work. The organisation doesn't really have a way of measuring that the partner's actually doing a good job, other than successful delivery and completion of acceptance tests, but that's really focused on functionality, not capability. The partner also wants to be able to demonstrate to their customer that they're following recognised best practices and delivering successfully. So in this case, the BizTalk Maturity Assessment is actually really beneficial for both the organisation and the partner, because throughout the life cycle of the project, this would give both stakeholders a really good way of being able to assess where they are, and for the partner to be able to demonstrate to the organisation that they're doing all the right things. The final scenario is called cross-project quality assurance. In this case, imagine you work for a consultancy and you have a bunch of teams working with different customers delivering BizTalk projects. What you'll probably find is that some of these projects will be very successful, but some of them also might be quite painful or even turn into project failures. And from a consultancy perspective, what you want to understand is, what is it that the projects that are successful do that the ones that have problems don't do? And that can be really beneficial to both your profit line from the consultancy's perspective, but also your customer satisfaction. This is, again, another good use case for the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, because you can actually look across all of these projects and measure them against the same benchmark, and that'll give you a good way of identifying weaknesses in certain projects and potentially finding patterns about what works and what doesn't work. This can also help you to ensure that your projects are consistent. So at this point, we've talked about 7 usage scenarios where the BizTalk Maturity Assessment can help you, but one of the common themes you'll tend to find across most of these scenarios is that when things go wrong, often the technology is blamed for deficiencies that actually boil down to the organisational capability to deliver projects with BizTalk, and that's something where we think the BizTalk Maturity Assessment can really help. Now let's take a look at the BizTalk Maturity Assessment. The aim of the BizTalk Maturity Assessment is to provide an industry-recognised model of the common behaviours which lead to successful integration experiences with BizTalk. At a very high level, the BizTalk Maturity Assessment involves 4 key stages. We start with a survey of your capability, which involves approximately 200 questions about different aspects of BizTalk in your organisation. After this, we'll move on to profile your results, which will let you view the data in different ways. This then lets you identify improvement activities, if any are required. You then would move on to implement these improvements, which will allow you to again go through this cycle: surveying, profiling, identification, and improve. This helps you implement continuous improvement of your capability, and hopefully could get you from a place where you might find BizTalk difficult to a place where you can be really agile and you can really take advantage of BizTalk as an integration platform. When you undertake the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, you'll be asked a number of questions about behaviours relating to your BizTalk capability. These behaviour-based questions will be grouped into categories and maturity levels. On the left-hand side, you can see that there's a number of categories, so this allows us to look at different aspects such as architecture, development and infrastructure, and a number of others. And this helps us break down your capability to look at specific areas for improvement. We'd also look at your capability in terms of a number of different maturity levels. This follows the typical maturity model sort of setup where we've got things like initial, managed, standardized, predictable and optimizing, and we'll actually talk about this a little bit more in the next slide. On the current slide, you can see a typical maturity model, which shows a linear progression from an immature to a mature state. However, with the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, we felt that this model didn't really accurately represent what we wanted to achieve. We felt that there was a little bit of an issue with pigeonholing of an organisation in this typical model. So, for example, an organisation may display really mature processes in one area, but really immature processes in another, and this model doesn't really allow you to represent that. We also felt that the model is a little bit subjective, and we really wanted something that could be measurable. And this would mean that through a more advanced model, we'd be able to demonstrate improvement by comparing where we were in 2 points in time. With the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, we really wanted to create a maturity profile, which would give us a much more detailed analysis of where your capability actually is. This would also allow us to monitor improvements, and you can see on the current slide an example organisation where we could measure their improvement on the left, which was a typical scenario where the company was having problems. After we implemented some improvement initiatives, we reassessed the company, and you can see on the right hand side how the maturity model's showing significant improvement in all areas. And actually this profile view makes it really obvious to see where your company stands at this very high level. Now let's take a look at a quick demo. As you can see on the screen now, I'm currently on the website for the BizTalk Maturity Assessment, and there's a lot of information here to tell you about the theory behind the model, how it's been applied, and who's been involved in its development. However, for the purposes of this demo, we want to show you how to obtain it, so let's click the Get Assessment button. And this will take you to a form where you can fill that in, and you'll be able to tell us a little bit of information about who you are, how you're going to be using BizTalk, and then we'll send you an email with a link to download the assessment. Once you have the assessment, it's very simple, and it's actually a spreadsheet which tells you a little bit about the model and gives you the analysis and questions. So on the spreadsheet, if you go to the My Assessment tab, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of questions in here, and actually you can go and filter by question type so you can look at the different areas. So let's take a quick look at some of the architecture questions as an example. So you can see there's a whole bunch of questions here about different things related to architecture for BizTalk. And typically what you'd find is whoever was driving the assessment initiative would speak to specialists in each of these areas. So we may have a BizTalk architect who we talk to about how we do architecture in your organization relating to BizTalk, and we'd answer these questions. So we'd basically go down the list looking at each individual question, and the answer would be either true or false. At the end of the assessment, when you've covered all the different sections, you'll have a nice big list of questions and a good overview of where you are. The next thing you would do would be to go on the Graphs tab, and if you go to the Data menu and the Refresh All button, this will update all of the pivot tables and graphs in the spreadsheet, and you'll now be able to look at each of the different areas. So having a quick look at this, you can see we've got a number of pivot tables and graphs here, and the first one to look at is the overall maturity level. And you can see here we've got in the overall maturity, we can see it as a bar graph, and we can also see it as the radar chart, and this gives us a really high level view. This is where your company currently stands. If you want to drill down into that a little bit further, we've got two graphs to the left here, which is the overall maturity by category. So we can have a quick look at this graph here, and it'll tell us for each category. We're not really looking at the maturity level at this stage, just for each category, what did you score out of the possible that was available? And you can see in this sample organisation, they're struggling quite a bit here. And for each category, there's not necessarily the same number of questions. So the graph to the left, maturity scores by category, that'll actually illustrate to you how many points you got, which is the blue line, out of how many that were available, which is the orange line for each category. So for example, here you can see we got about 6 out of about 30 for architecture. The next level of detail is off to the right, and we can look in some quite detailed examples here by analysing by category and level. So this gives you a couple of different graphs here. So there's one here where we go by category and level, and the next one goes by level and category. And they all just pivot the same data in slightly different ways. So what I would often do is you can actually filter the graph, and we can put all of the different categories in here, and it's a bit difficult to read really when it's all in. But if I was working with say the development area, I might just filter that to, let's say, development and deployment, and let's look at those two areas. And you can see here we've got for the development, which is blue, development's orange, deployment's blue. We can see in the initial area our scores for each of these things in the managed area. So maybe deployment looks like it might have a few problems, but development's actually good at that initial maturity level. As we go up the levels, the maturity is really not scoring as well in development, but actually in deployment it does quite well in those two middle bits. So there's some quite interesting things with this organisation. But this really illustrates the point I made earlier in the presentation, that while you can be quite weak in certain areas, you might be pretty good in others. And sometimes that can be a really big problem, but sometimes there might be specific reasons for that, and it might not necessarily affect your overall capability. But you can see here we've got a lot of different ways of looking at this data, which gives you some really interesting insights and can really help you understand why your organisation's successful and or why it may not be. So who's the audience for some of this data we've gathered? Well, we've got the data at three different levels. We've got the overall maturity, which is really something that your CTO, your senior management, or your capability owner is going to be really interested in. They probably don't really care too much or understand potentially the detail of it, but they just want to know if things are in a good place. The next level is maturity by category, and this is probably of interest to a delivery manager, development manager, infrastructure manager. They're going to be responsible for one particular area within your capability, and they probably want to know that their area is pretty good. The final level is by category and level, and this is really where we get down to the ground level, where we've got developers, architects, administrators, or system admins, and they'll really understand the detail of the questions that relate to their particular category, and they'll really be the ones who are going to be looking for the key improvement opportunities and actually be able to implement them. So you can see that from the maturity assessment, we're able to produce data targeted at three different types of audience. So if we do a quick recap of some of the data that's available to you from the assessment, for those at the highest level, the overall maturity, we've got the profile, which really gives you a top-down view of what your capability looks like, and this is great for demonstrating overall maturity improvements. This was the information that's really aimed at your CTOs or capability owners. Next, we've got the maturity by category, and this was really aimed at the owner of a particular area within your BizTalk capability. So let's say, for example, you're a development manager. You're going to be particularly interested in your development capability. And for this company here, you can see their development is right up in the 90s. And that's a really good place to be if you're a development manager. You've got a really strong capability. You're probably also interested in a couple of areas, so you may be interested in things like people or requirements. And if you're good in all of those places, you're probably going to have a good capability to deliver projects. Now, what's really important in integration is that might be the development manager's area, and he may be really successful, but he can be really let down if some of the other capability areas aren't very strong. So, for example, if deployment and infrastructure is fairly weak, the development manager may not be responsible for that, but he might be hurt by poor performance in production, which makes it look like his code's delivered by his development teams isn't of high quality, or all manner of other problems can come in here. But this should give all of the area owners a really good view of where everybody stands. Finally, we could look at the maturity by level and category. So in this case, this is an example of where I filtered the graph, and I'm just looking at development and deployment again, and I can see which bits look really good. And perhaps if my capability was really strong in initial, managed, and standardized, I may not be worried too much about the fourth and fifth level of maturity, but if I'm really good in those as well, I'm probably just all the better for that. And this really lets people look into the detail, and perhaps if you're scoring really high in predictable and optimized, but you're low in initial and managed, that might explain why you perhaps would struggle in certain areas where your overall score might not look too bad. And that level of detail is really for the guys on the ground who would understand the technicalities of how different categories would work, such as how development works, how infrastructure works, etc. In summary, the BizTalk Maturity Assessment contains over 200 questions about different aspects of your BizTalk capability. On the website, we have 2 case studies demonstrating how the BizTalk Maturity Assessment's been used. The BizTalk Maturity Assessment's been contributed to by 8 MVPs and also by a number of recognised partners from around the world. And the best thing of all is the BizTalk assessment is actually free to use. So feel free to go onto the website, and we'd love to get your feedback to hear how you get on with it and if it's helping your organisation get better at delivering BizTalk projects.